All right. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So welcome to the AMA. Basically, thank you, Adam. So basically, you can ask any questions you have about SQL, whether it is a technical question or it is about interviews. Just to get an idea, if you could just either raise your hand or type a one into the chat. How many of you have experience with SQL before? Okay. Bootcamp learning. Okay. Learning. Okay.
Hello.
Yes. Yeah, so I see like some of you are working with SQL, some of you are learning SQL. So at least we have the basic concept of SQL, right? Again, the reason that SQL is so important in the industry right now is that it is a very common database tool. And it helps us organize our data to be a structured table set. Okay. Um, Now there's a lot of SQL languages out there, right? So there's MySQL, there's PostgreSQL, there's Oracle SQL. Um, they kind of work on the same basis, but there are slight differences between them. Okay, so if you learn the syntax in MySQL and you go and work with PostgreSQL, you see that some keywords may not translate over. Some things might be defined a bit differently, right? But I would say learning one SQL language, so learning MySQL, will be good enough that when you go into the workplace, right, transferring that knowledge into PostgreSQL shouldn't be too difficult. Okay. So for all of you who are learning, keep at the language that you are using, right? But just know that when you apply for jobs, there will be other type of SQL languages. Okay. And you are more than qualified once you get the knowledge to apply for those jobs as well, right? So don't be afraid that you learn MySQL, but ask for Postgres, right? Still apply for those jobs. Okay. Uh, yes, Matthew, go ahead.
I just was a bit curious about, I know that there's interview questions for data science,
Mhm,
like interview questions, but and you can prepare for that on LeetCode. They have SQL questions for that.
mhm,
But what about for a data engineering interview? Because for data engineering, you just need to be creating tables, right?
mhm.
I don't
So
know where to find questions for those.
For creating tables, it might be difficult to find them online because a lot of these websites, so LeetCode is one, there's HackerRank as well. I would say HackerRank has a bit more SQL questions in comparison. Um, but all these websites, they have like built-in data sets where you're going to run your code against. So for you to be building tables as a practice, maybe there is like W3 resources. That might be a good one to just kind of go through their documentation, go through their licenses, go through their license, and see how well you understand them. Um, Other than that, I would say there are interview questions that are made available. So I think there is like the interview query. Maybe I can show you the websites. Give me 1 second. Uh, yeah, so there's like interview queries. So they have a bit more of like not just hands-on questions, but more about like behavior questions, more about understanding questions. So you can go through them. I believe you can filter by database, like SQL things, right? So you can go through those. But just purely for creating tables, setting up the structure, I don't think there is any good websites where you can like test your knowledge against.
Okay. Yeah, because I was just getting a data engineering certificate, but I think maybe I'll just look back on like my lectures.
Mhm.
But yeah, I found that HackerRank and LeetCode had some pretty good SQL query questions.
Mhm. Yeah, so practicing query questions is much easier. But yeah, the structure wise, for data engineering, I would say get comfortable with the most common ones, right? So how to insert, how to delete, um, how to update a table, how to create views. Those are the kind of skills that you want to practice. Um, Things like primary key, foreign key, right? Those are the kind of structure you want to set up. Um, Maybe even like auto increment, right? For creating a unique ID column, will be something that will be helpful to you, right? So those are the kind of skills you want to look at. But again, for practice wise, you just have to create your own, basically.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And is NoSQL also very commonly used these days, or should we just focus on SQL if we're just trying to, get our foot in the door?
Yeah, so NoSQL is getting popular, but I would say most companies are still using SQL, right? Because it is a more structured data type. If you're going to techniques that are focusing more on like AI, maybe NoSQL is requirement because they want to be able to handle all type of data, right? Not just structured data. But I would say knowing MySQL is a great way to get started. And then once you're in the door, and they do need NoSQL, there will be some training involved that can help you make the process.
Okay, thank you, Tanshu.
Yeah, okay. So any other questions from the audience? Okay. So yeah, so like we mentioned so far, right? There's a few websites for you to practice your coding skills. So LeetCode is a very popular website. You do have to go to problems, I believe. Okay. So LeetCode is a popular website that you can practice. A lot of the questions are in Python though. So in comparison, right? To HackerRank, LeetCode, I would say have a bit less questions there. Okay. So HackerRank, you can find, sorry, give me one silence. So you can find questions in HackerRank by the different languages that you want. So it's a bit easier for you to filter out the practice questions. Both of them will ask you to make an account. So you can actually like test your code on the website as well. Right? So you can run your code and submit it and compare it to other people's. Okay. And they will have a discussion board that will ask you to sign up. Okay. There will be like discussions. So if you do get stuck on some questions or you're just not sure if your query is good enough, right? Or you're not sure why you're getting the score you're getting, you can always look through the discussions or sometimes there is like solutions to these problems. So you can double check, right? So these two are very good websites, especially for those who are starting, okay? The other thing is they can filter by difficulty. Okay, so for those who are not used to this yet, you can filter by difficulty. If you are practicing for interview purposes only, focus on medium and test your knowledge on easy, right? So medium levels are the ones that you probably going to see in interviews. Easy ones are the kind of basic um, knowledge that you need to have, right? So something like how to work with a string, how to get a few fields or a few columns from the table itself, right? How to do a simple join, how to kind of reformat, those kind of things, right? So if you are just again practicing for interview. Don't worry about the hard questions. Those are a bit more challenging. Those are things that will take you a bit longer to do. If you do have more time, of course, try out. But if you just again focusing on acing the interviews, just go with easy and medium. For those of you who are reviewing for interviews or who are preparing for interviews, some of the things that you need to know, right? How to do a join, how to do filter, right? Those are kind of the basic ones that you need to have. Things like window functions will be good to know as well. There's a lot of problems you do need window functions to help you solve. Okay. Things like the different type of joins, right? So know the difference when to use, let's say, left join versus inner join, or at least explain your reasoning why you're using a left join versus inner join. Um, Basic functions like string functions, datetime functions, right? Those are kind of crucial. So learn what they are, and just be comfortable with it, right? Just like when you're learning a language, when you're learning, let's say English, for example, you start with spelling, and then you go into grammar, and then you go into creating sentences and writing paragraphs, right? Same thing with SQL, right? Start with the keywords, right? Select from where, group by, those kind of keywords, and then go into focusing on subqueries and joins, and then after that, going to Windows functions and the CRUD operations, right? Create, read, update, delete operations. Okay. The reason I say focus on create, read, update, and delete operation at the end is because those are more about like changing the data set, right? So you're not just extracting data, but you're changing the database a little bit, right? By creating a new table or adding a new column, deleting some entries from the table itself. Um, Unless you are applying for a job that is like senior level, uh, most of the time you're not going to be able to do that, right? Because they have to protect their data. They don't want everyone to be able to create a new table and then disrupt the schema. They don't want you to delete data by accident when it is important, right? So that's something that's higher level. So we can put that off to the end, right? Focus on writing queries and getting it done fast. Hmm. So again, any questions from the audience? I don't want to just blabber on for the entire hour.
Shu, do you know when it's best to use left joins and inner joins?
Mhm. So inner join is when you just want the data that is in common, right? So um, let's say you have a transaction table with a bunch of customer IDs, and you have the customers table, right? If you are looking at, let's say, your royalty program, like customer behaviors, where they have an ID, then maybe inner join will be the best way to go because you are filtering out all those who do not have a membership, right? But let's say if you want to do some promotions, right? So you want to see how many customers are royalty, how many are not, then left join would make sense, right? So the key question you had to ask when you're choosing between left join and inner join is, are you looking for missing values, right? Are you looking for things that are not in common between the table, right? Because if you are looking for, let's say, customers who haven't joined or uh, payments that has not been received, right? Those kind of things, then yes, left join will be the way to go. Okay. But if you just want to do things that are in common, um, then I would say inner join will be the way to go. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Um, they'll give me some things to think about. And how I found that the advanced SQL on HackerRank was pretty challenging.
Mhm.
For the interview, is it like okay just to do like the basic and intermediate?
Yes, so I would say so. Yeah. So for the advanced is more about like taking your knowledge to the next level. Um, and most of the question I think is very like tailored. So unless you're applying for that industry or applying to that scenario, it's unlikely for you to do those kind of queries, right? Basic and intermediate covers a lot of the common queries that you'll be running, covers a lot of like a variety of industries. So I say focus on those is the way to go.
Okay, sounds good.
Uh, yeah. So the other thing I want to mention is, especially with joins, right? You may want to consider subqueries before you do a join, right? So instead of just joining two tables together and then selecting columns and then doing a filter, right? You might want to do a subquery where you filter out some of the things first before you join. Because when you join two tables, um, you are creating a Cartesian product, which means let's say you have 5 rows in the first table and 4 rows in the others. You make them together and it's like a 20-row table, right? So this multiplies the rows together, and that's how many you have. But if you can filter, right? So if you can, let's say from the transaction table, you're looking only at the current months, right? Do a filter there. Before you join, you're using a smaller table to join, okay? Um, this is something that you should consider, especially with technical interviews, right? The other thing with technical interviews is when you have time, right? So first thing you want to do is solve the problem, right? So that's your first goal. Make sure you can answer the question with your query, okay? The next thing you want to do is optimize. So how can you make it run faster, right? Is there, again, subqueries that you can do to make it faster? Are there maybe tables that you join that are not needed, right? Columns that exist in other tables that you don't need a third table for. Are there things that you can do that make the calculation or make the memory uses less? After that, you have to think about edge cases. So they may give you a sample data set, but you have to consider that that's not the entire data set, right? And I think LeetCode does a great job doing that, right? They give you a few examples, but they don't give you all the scenarios, right? They give you like these constraints. So let me just take any question here, right? So they'll give you some constraints, right? But anything within that constraint is possible, right? So you had to think about, okay, how would a real life scenario have edge cases, right? So for example, you might be looking at a customer table, and some of the customers did not put in their name, or sorry, did not put in their age. So your system may just give like a very big number, right? So like 999, right? So if it's your query, how would you handle that, right? How would you make sure that the age column has valid information and maybe input a no age given, some kind of value to indicate that, right? Similarly, when you are doing joins, right, it might look like everything's working fine with the columns that you're using, but think about, okay, what if that column has missing values, or what if there are, for example, customers that only purchase 1 or 2 items, but you're filtering for consistent customers, right? How would you define that? Or for churns, right? How would you define the churn status? Is it they don't come for a month, that customer is a churn, or is it they don't come for a year, or is it that they only made a few purchases, right? So the edge cases is something that will help you in your interview, but it's not like an absolutely necessary thing for you to write in your code. Okay. So your first goal again, solve the question. Second goal is to optimize. And then if you do have more time, right, change your code so you consider edge cases. If you don't have time, most of the cases in interviews is that after your technical interview, you will have another like in-person or through Zoom kind of interview with the technical team, right? And it's very likely that they will ask you to talk about your code, right? So why do you use this query? What does this line do? what if this happens, right? So that's when you have to start explaining, not in like code wise, but like step wise, right? Your thinking process, how you can solve those kinds of challenges. Okay. Um, that will come a bit of practice. So when you're doing legal questions or HackerRank questions or even interview query questions, think about that as well, right? So after you write your code, what kind of things can break the code? How would you solve it to not have it break, right? Those kind of things. Uh, are we discussing a mock-up interview or just hypotheticals for a potential? Yeah. So we're for this session, you just ask me anything. So anything is open, right? But the example I give you is kind of like a hypothetical potential interview, right? So in those cases, again, they can basically ask you anything related to either your code or to SQL just generally, right? So they may ask you, okay, how do I um, for example, how do I um, consolidate my database, right? So I have, let's say for Amazon, right? I have a lot of sellers on my website, and they are putting on products, right, with different product names, with different descriptions, and with different prices, right? But internally, I want to see what product is popular right now. So I want to kind of consolidate them. So the same product, even if it's with different names, different descriptions, different prices, will get clustered together, right? So for example, iPhone 10, right? Someone might put iPhone X, someone might put iPhone 10 with a numerical, someone just saying Apple phone, right? Or the latest Apple phone, right? So again, you don't have to write out the actual query, but you have to talk about how would you make sure, or how would you try and make sure that the same product are grouped together, right? So that may be something for you to take home today to think about. You can also find a video like this on YouTube that talks about the process as well. I think I took the example from the YouTube video, right? But those are the kind of questions that you can expect, right? So it's not, for the interview, it's not just write the code, right? Have a code that can solve it. Especially for technical interviews where you're talking to each other, it's more about your thought process. So don't just say, I'm going to use a select statement. I'm going to use a regex statement, right? Talk about why, right? What are you going to use the regex statement for? What are you going to select? What are you assuming in their database, right? So talk to them about all those steps. And then, they may add on more criteria for you, right? They might say, okay, this product has no description, or this product is in a different language, right? Things like that. So you have to talk about, okay, how do I possibly solve this, right? Is there any tools I can use, maybe besides SQL, that can help me do this, right? Is there any data sets that I know or that I can find that can be imported to help me do this, right? Are there some things that might be, too difficult, too complicated, that I might need to talk with other teams to help me do this, right? So it's not just you solve the problem, it's how would you work in that environment. Okay. Right. The other advice I want to give you is, besides knowing how to write the code, you should also know some of the common error messages. Right. So if you see a syntax error, or if you see you know uh some kind of like to give you an error message, or they talk to you about error message, you should be able to point to where the potential errors comes from, right? Let's say you forgot a bracket, if you wrote the name wrong, right? Or if it's just like a column that has a wrong spelling or it doesn't exist, right? So those will be in the initial stages of the interview, where they just try to test your skills. Most of the time, that might be like a pre-written answer just given to HR, right? So you might want to use keywords in those answers as well to demonstrate your basic knowledge of SQL, right? because they might jot down your answer, but they may miss something. So you might want to repeat those keywords. Just say, okay, uh, column not found means that the schema of the table does not have a column of that name. It could be due to misspelling. It could be due to the column existing in another table, right? Those kinds of things. So with SQL, don't just focus on writing code, right? Understand your code, explain your code. And the other thing I want to mention is use documentations, right? So when you're writing your code, write down these kind of strings, right, to explain what you're doing. Okay, because you can have a very beautiful code, right? It might be like 2 lines of code that can solve a very complex problem, but sometimes maybe expanding that and having more documentations to explain your steps will be better, right? Because they're not just looking at your coding prowess, they're also looking at how you communicate with the rest of the team, right? Once they hire you, you're not just working by yourself, you're working as a team. So the communication is a very big factor as well. So again, I open the floor up to everyone. Any questions that you have, again, about any technical problems or interviews, or anything related to SQL?
Pinshu, is it quite possible that they could be taking some of these questions from LeetCode or HackerRank as part of the interview? Or are they like, do they just make their own questions and then, get you to solve it? Or I'm just kind of wondering if maybe I might come across the same LeetCode or HackerRank question in an interview.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And yes, it's very likely that you will see, if not the same question, very similar questions, right? So they may change a few parameters, they may change a few numbers, or they may even change the purpose of the question, right? So instead of, again, I'm just taking the first few questions here as examples, right? Instead of like 2 sum, I know there's 3 sum and 4 sum in LeetCode, but they may say like 5 sums, right? Or they may expand it to like, let's say, median of 2 sorted array, median of 2 arrays that are not sorted, right? Those kind of things. So it's very likely they will take a question from these websites and adapt it to their need or alter in some way to test your skills, right? That's why I say like these 2 websites are very good, because once you know the general structure of the questions and of the solutions, answering their questions will be much easier.
Okay. Yeah. And how much should I be preparing for these interview questions, say versus, looking, I guess, I'm trying to have a balance between doing projects, and doing these coding questions,
Mhm.
I mean, I don't know if there's a 100% answer, but maybe like, should I be having a certain ratio of um, putting my focus, making projects on my GitHub, versus, doing um, elite code questions.
Mm. So yeah, so there's no 100% answer because it's different. But I would say, at least my advice to you would be focus more on your personal projects, because that's where you can demonstrate your skills more, right? Having a lot of good portfolio projects will demonstrate that you not only understand the concept, but you can apply it in different cases. Right? So if you have a target industry or target company, look up some of the current things that you're doing, or look up, some of the similar data sets or problems on these websites, and build your project to solve their problem, right? And again, add documentations, explain your code. Don't just give like a big block of code without any strings inside. Um, and with that, I would say maybe that's your majority of your time building good projects and to show your employers or future employers. And practice, because when you're doing that, you're already practicing your skills, right? It's not just copy and paste or reading code. You're already doing a lot of code practice. But besides that, come back into LeetCode and HackerRank, focus on things that you couldn't practice in your projects. So if you're doing a lot of like window functions, then maybe in HackerRank, focus more on subqueries and joins, right? Instead of window functions, because you don't want them to overlap too much. So yeah, so I would say focus mainly on projects, because that's how recruiters would see your skills. Because everything you do on HackerRank is just for you, right? You can't really post your HackerRank to the employers. So yeah.
No, that's really helpful. Yeah, I think the being able to, practice questions that you're not using the same type of knowledge. That's very valuable. Thank you.
You're welcome. So I'm just reading the comment in the chat. Yeah. Find out there is a reference. We're really testing a problem to solve. Most of my contracts are okay. Yeah, that's fine. Are people that are encountering these tests still wasn't applying for full-time for this contract? Is that what triggered? Okay, so basically for the test style questions, it actually depends. So it's not always full-time or always contract. To give you a very simple question in most cases, especially for the contract, I guess they don't expect you to work with them for a long time. So it might be like a simple 1 or 2 question that they may just ask you, right? Instead of asking you to write the code, they may just like ask you to talk through it, right? Like, okay, here is our database that have these tables. How would you solve the problem? So one of the interview questions I saw during, it's not an interview, but one of the application questions, I should say, during LinkedIn, where they just say, okay, you're designing a database for a university, right? Talk to me about what tables are there, what kind of columns do you expect? How would you create the identifier? So it's not writing code, but you kind of like explain your process in that case. For the test style type of interviews, depending on the company, I would say, I think for like Amazon or from Microsoft, they may give you those kind of test style interview questions where like, here are these problems. Here is a scenario. Write me a code, right? You just have your sample code and you'll probably run it against their sample database to check to see how well you do, right? That might be automatic filtering that they do. And in most cases, they will ask someone to read through the code, right? To see, are you using just very simple syntax, or are you using more complex syntax? Are you using queries that are just too convoluted that something simpler will do the trick? Are you writing a query that is taking up more memory than it needs, or is taking longer than it needs, right? So it's again, so for these kind of questions, it's not the type of position you're applying for, it's more company based, right? But you can always expect them to ask you some kind of question related to the code itself. But you may not write the code, you have to explain it. Right? So I would join these 2 tables, assuming they have these identifiers, and this is why I would do that. Right? So those kind of questions. Yeah. Any other questions? The other thing I want to say was the SQL questions is be prepared to be just giving a scenario, right? So there is no sample data, right? And they may want to just write a query. So they say, okay, here is the scenario. Okay, assume that there's ABC table, right? Write me a query that will get this result. So in those cases, it might be a good idea if you have enough time, right, to create just a sample data set, right, syncing up random data or sample data that fit their scenario. Okay, so that we can actually test your code. Okay? Because if they don't give you a data set, that means they don't want you to test it, or they want to see how well you're writing, right, without testing, right? But for you, especially if you're doing this at home, right, write a sample data set and just test against it, right? At least to see that your query is working. Okay. I have heard as well where sometimes they ask you to write the code in like on paper or even like on Word processors, right? So without the actual interfaces. So if that is the case, you have to be comfortable with the syntax. Okay. If you're doing it that way, I would say for the keywords at least, write them in capital letters. I know that SQL, most of the cases are not case sensitive, right? But if you are writing out or you're typing out, like those keywords tend to get lost in autoqueries. So use capital letters for the keywords like select, from, or join, right? And also make sure you indent and make sure you add indentations. Again, this is how they want to see your, I'll say your practice, your behavior when you're writing code, right? Because in SQL especially, you don't need indentation, right? You can write a code that is weirdly indented or very long, right? And it still works. It still does its job. But again, when you read it later, it might be like headache, right? So they want to see without an editor, can you write a code that is nice and neat? And can you write a code that possibly works? Okay. For those ones, you will need to like be more familiar. Is it important to capitalize SQL when writing queries for interviews as well? I would say if you can remember it, because like sometimes when you're kind of nervous, you don't remember it. So I would say if you can remember it, yes, definitely try to capitalize the keywords, right? At least that way they stand out. Okay. But they're not going to just focus on capitalization, right? It's like if you put select as all capitalized or not capitalized, they're not going to penalize you for that. But having them capitalized makes them stand out. And again, use new lines when you're writing code, right? So select, maybe not just one select all on one line. So just as a quick example. Okay. So maybe don't do like, I have to restore. Okay. So maybe not do like select order date, order ID, and let's say sales from orders table, right? Again, this works fine in theory, but when you're writing it for interviews, use new lines, right? So at least this way it looks nicer, right? Same thing with your statements. So like where, let's say order date, what year order date, let's say. And let's say sales creators at 100, right? So again, this works fine. This is maybe I made a mistake, but this works fine, right? In theory, but again, use new lines to just make it easier to read. Okay, so that's the next step, right? When you're writing your answer for the interview, first thing you want to do is just answer. Okay, no matter how messy the code is, no matter how uh, weird the code looks, as long as answer the question, that's the first job done, right? And then take some time to beautify it, right? Add in comments, add in like new lines. Okay. Any other questions? Now, because I have been teaching SQL for a while, I always have to remind people, right? Always add the semicolon at the end. It's very easy to forget, right? Especially when you're typing, it's very easy to forget for the semicolon, but just think of it as like writing a sentence, right? In English, you always add a period at the end, so always add a semicolon at the end. For programs like SQL Workbench, right? If they don't see the semicolon, they'll continue on, right? So two queries might be run together, and they'll give you an error, right? So always add that in. I know it's a small thing to talk about, but it gets pretty important once you're writing long queries.
Tianshu, sorry, I'm asking a lot of questions, but
Mhm.
I finished my data engineering program
Mhm.
and we did a lot of projects with SQL. And now I'm out of projects and I'm just kind of thinking of what to do next, where I can keep practicing my programming. So I've been looking for, my friends and family if they need any data engineering projects, if there's maybe doing some contract work, but I was just wondering if you have any ideas of what to do after you finish your program. How do you keep using SQL? If there's any, I don't know if there's any like websites with data sets.
So the best one I can suggest to you is Kaggle. So I believe you can search SQL and get some data sets from here. Um, you don't have to follow what they're asked. You can create your own. Um, you can create your own basically questions based on the data set, right? Um, just for example, let's do the first one, right? So the murder mystery data set. So they have the links that are here. You can download their data and start writing code. So some people share their code, some people do not. Okay. And the suggestion here from Darcy, yeah. So take out personal projects. So just basically anything that you do in your daily life, um, try to think of how can I apply that with data science, right? So it could be like keeping track of your personal expenses, right? So when you go out to spend money, maybe when you come back, you just put it into um, a spending table, right? And then at the end of the month, you can do some kind of visualization with that, or you can do some type of graph with that to just give you some ideas of your own personal behavior. Um, I guess spare time cycles, like yeah, so that's another way. Yeah, so volunteer. So teach about the course. Because the more you teach, and I found it myself as well, the more I talk with students, the more kind of issues I come across that I never thought about myself. Right? So students, like every batch of students, they always ask one or two questions that I never thought of myself. So I had to tell them, okay, you know what? Let me try out myself and see how I can solve it. And that will help you improve your skills a lot, right? Because when you're talking to someone, even if you have like a family member, you can just kind of talk to them like, hey, let me talk to you about SQL today. This is how you do this. Any questions? Did I explain the things properly? Do you understand it? Right? Maybe ask them to kind of say it back to you so you can see, okay, that's where the disconnect is. That's where I might want to explain a bit more, right? And it's not preparing you for a teaching job, but it's preparing you for the interview, right? When you explain
Right.
someone, you
Yeah.
want to explain
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah. Because I'm working on a database right now for
Mhm.
a project.
Mhm.
But yeah, I'm just trying to find new ways to, keep using what I learned because I feel once you can learn it, but then, if you don't use it, it's not as sharp in your mind. So that's all that I'm dealing with right now.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. So even sometimes if you don't have your own project, maybe just search up project that's already done online and redo their code, right? So think about, okay, this is what this person has done. How can I optimize it, right? Because that might be something that they'll ask you in interviews as well, right? Here's a code. What problems do you see? How do you optimize it, right? What would you do differently, right? So that could be a good practice as well. So even you don't write your own code, but look up other people's code, right? Just like search up, okay, SQL project, for example, um, bank fraud, right? Or SQL project sales tables, right? And open their code, right? See what kind of question they're answering. Okay, why? Okay, let's say for this one, right? So look through their code and say, okay, maybe I'll do it slightly differently here, right? They're using pandas, right? So how would I answer this in SQL, right? Those kind of things.
Right. That sounds good. And yeah, sorry, I this is a little bit off topic, but do you know of any free data visualization tools? Because I know that Power BI you have to have a license, right?
Mhm. Tableau has a free version. I, I don't think there is a limit to the free version itself. So I believe Tableau, you should be able to use it for free. I think the restriction is, oh, it says 1 year. Oh no, that's a license. So I believe the restriction is that um, there are some things that you cannot make public. So it's not like a live dashboard, but you can still use it to do most of the skills, right? Oh, Power BI that is free. Yeah, so I believe there's a few that are free. It's just that there might be some limitations to the
Okay.
full
Yeah.
version. Mhm.
I hope that wasn't too off topic
No,
and
no, no,
that
it's
yeah.
all good. Yeah, so thank you, Darcy and Jewel, for sharing those links and those comments. Okay, that's free. Okay, so the public, yeah. So yeah, so there is a lot of tools out there. I think um even if you don't want to install SQL, I believe you should be able to find a playground for SQL online as well. Um, it just gets a bit tougher when you want to load in files, right? But I do believe there's one or two, I don't remember it off the top of my head, but I do remember there's one or two websites where you can practice SQL online. Um, I don't even remember if you can create an account or it's just like a temporary place for you to do it, right? So you can look that up if you don't want to go through the whole problem of installing it on your computer. Um, Same thing with Python. So I know we're not talking about Python in this lesson, but same thing with Python, right? If you want to practice Python skills, there are like Google Colab, where you can just do it online instead of installing on your own computer, right? But having the software on your computer is beneficial because most of the time when you're working for a company, they have it installed on their workstation, right? So there might be some like different thing you do online that you don't do on your own laptop, right? And if you get used to that, it might be harder to adapt. So best scenario, install it on a computer. But if your computer is, let's say, old or slow, or there's just no room, or you just want to practice on the fly, let's say you're visiting someone and you didn't bring your own laptop and you want to practice skills, right? There are online versions for you to try.
Okay. Yeah, I'll look into that then.
Any other questions you have? All right, so if that's the case, I'll do a quick wrap up for today. So we do have in WeCloudData a few courses that are being produced that will be coming out as self-paced courses for you to learn the skills. And we do have TA support for those courses. So if you're interested, please contact Adam after the session. He can give you more information. Um, Besides that, for your own practice, again, look for data sets online. Just Google is the best friend, right? So search for projects that people have done, search for code, right? Even just simple code that you can just find problem with, troubleshooting. That will give you great idea on your knowledge as well. Okay. And with the SQL person, right? Just take one data set and just work the hell out of it, right? So even if it's just simple things, right? So how do I use the datetime function, right? Take one table that has a datetime column and just continue to write different code with it, right? How do I use sum function? How do I use window function, right? Just take one data set and just try your best to make the best out of it, right? Give yourself scenarios, right? Maybe you have like a product name column to say, okay, how do I clean it up? How do I separate that into multiple columns? How do I capitalize, right? So creating questions on your own is, I would say, the easiest way to find data sets. Besides that, yeah, so besides that, give each other or add each other on LinkedIn, on social media, talk to people in the same industry with the same interests, right? That's the best way for you to expand your knowledge. Because sometimes when you're working by yourself, right, your thinking is very linear. So you only think of certain types of questions. When you talk to someone else, you say, okay, what if you do it this way, right? And then you can actually try it and then see, okay, I couldn't solve it. Could you help me solve it, right? And then you can both work on that. Okay. So the other thing I want to mention is that we do have other lunch and learn sessions throughout the week next week as well. We do have a hands-on or kind of like a demo SQL session next week as well. We will be solving some problems. So if you're interested, feel free to sign up for that, and I look forward to seeing you then again. But other than that, thank you everyone so much for taking your time out, especially during your lunch, to join us and having a wonderful discussion. Okay. Oh, yeah. So if you do have any questions, feel free to contact us as well, right? It's not just come and that's it, right? Feel free to message us through any means necessary, right? Email or Slack or Discord. Again, you can message Adam if you don't have the links to that. And I really look forward to learning with you and working with you and possibly being a co-worker with you in the future. Okay. So thank you, everyone,
Thank
and
you.
have a wonderful day. Bye, everyone.